District of Conservation is sponsored by CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. If you caught the announcement on yesterday's episode, I am really pleased to announce that we are welcoming back Fox News contributor and Town Hall news editor Katie Pavlich to the podcast. Her appearance is our most listened to episode thus far in the podcast's existence, and we're so grateful to welcome her. Katie's largely going to focus on her new Fox Nation program, Luxury Hunting Lodges of America. I got to binge watch that recently, and I know you will love the program too. We also wade into some current events. She's going to express her thoughts on certain Biden policies, the Return Act, and some more thoughts that she has about the current state of affairs as it relates to conservation, energy, the outdoors, and the like. So I think you guys are going to enjoy Katie's return to the podcast and be interested to go outdoors and check out some of the lodges she scouted and experienced on her Fox Nation program. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Katie Pavlich today. Thanks for listening. We're delighted to have Katie Pavlich return to the podcast this week. Katie, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come chat with me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Actually, I don't know if you know this, you're the most downloaded episode I've had on my podcast. Our conversation is even 2 years ago. So I was like, I have to bring her back, obviously, to talk about your new show and then current events. So yeah, I think listeners love hearing from you because you do great work. So really, really appreciate you speaking with me today.
Well, hopefully we can beat the last episode with this episode.
Heck yes.
Since we set the bar so high.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll need your help in that. And I think we can accomplish that. Tell my listeners about your new program, Luxury Hunting Lodges of America. It's been all over. I've seen you plug it on the 5 and social media, of course, but why is that programming so unique and how does it depart from your regular commentary work?
Yeah, so I was able to take a break from politics and take a couple weekends throughout the past 9 months and go do this amazing project with Fox Nation. It's called, as you said, Luxury Hunting Lodges of America. And we went to Honey Break in Louisiana, Highland Hills in Oregon, Three Forks Ranch in Wyoming, and Gray Cliffs Ranch in Montana. And each place was so different. And we really focused on obviously the aspect of the lodge, because I think a lot of people who aren't maybe as attuned to the outdoors or don't have as much experience might be kind of intimidated by, trying to get their feet in the water, so to speak, when it comes to getting in the outdoors and want to kind of ease their way into it. And these lodges are a great way to do that. They're super family focused, but they're just comfortable. And although they are very beautiful and obviously grandiose in their size, they're also very welcoming and warm to families. And a lot of these owners of these places have a high return rate because of the way they treat their guests. And so it was just a really great experience. And then on top of that, obviously, is the hunting and the fishing aspect of it. As you know, I grew up hunting with my dad and still continue to hunt with him when I can. I don't have as much time. But the show really, we focused on the conservation aspect of hunting and how, private landowners, like the ones who own these lodges, really have put so much of their own time and money into, conserving their land, their property, and bringing, a respect to the animals and the wildlife, and which allows their guests to enjoy it. So it was really interesting to see how each place had a different, different landscape and different kinds of species of birds. And obviously that plays into just where they are, right? But it was just a really fun experience. And I got to do things that I'd never done before, like ice fishing and, got some more experience with my fly fishing and like gator hunting in Louisiana, which that episode is great because we talk all about how, they're overpopulated because they've been federally protected for too long. So now they're just everywhere. So yeah, it's a combination of everything, but it's kind of a half and half. It's the benefit of staying in a lodge, but also you get to get outside and then go take a nice warm shower and be comfortable when you come home.
There's nothing wrong with these kind of glamping experiences. I love to do those as well. I've done a few times. I can do the rugged experience, but I had serious FOMO. I was like, oh my gosh, she's having the time of her life.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you seem to be enjoying yourself. And did you have a particular favorite of the 4 lodges, or were all of them equally amazing?
I did, but I'm not going to say.
To not anger or upset the
Yeah,
people you befriended.
I did have a favorite, but they all had their own unique aspect. I think the one that was my favorite was just because of where it was in my childhood and kind of where I grew up and the kind of environment that I spent my childhood in the outdoors. But I loved all of them, and each one taught me, new things. And I think that's what I love about the show too. Is I think that when people spend time with you, you owe it to them to respect their time. Time is everybody's most valuable resource, and I want them to learn something. Not, so to be respectful of their time or try to teach them something. And so I think the show has a lot of different interesting tidbits that people may not know about the regions, or the way that these property owners have worked to restore a river, for example, in Wyoming. So yeah, I did have a favorite, but I will just leave that for people to choose their own favorite when they watch the show.
Absolutely. And what has the response been so far to the programming? Have people
It's been
generally liked
great.
it?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of really great, nice, supportive emails. I've gotten a very few though, angry viewers. I did get one woman who wrote in and said that she thought it was a show about hunting lodges, not about hunting. And it's like, well, I'm not really sure what you thought a hunting lodge was for. But so you can't please everybody. But it really is like a well-rounded show about conservation, the lodges, the owners, the people who visit. And it just was really a great time, and I'm grateful I was able to do it.
Speaking of fly fishing, I know you had some struggles with it previously and the trout were kind of unkind to you, but I loved the fact that you caught a fish more. I know you have with your husband before, but you caught, I think, your personal best on the fly. And that was so cool to see you do that and learn about the history of that lodge. Are you more confident now to tackle fishing, you think?
I guess I've always been like, I've never been afraid to do it. It's just kind of a running joke that like the fish don't come near me. Like they know I'm there. They run as far away as possible. But I did have some success and some good luck during the show. So I guess that's what matters, right? They turned the cameras on, and all of a sudden the fish wanted to be stars of the show. So I think fly fishing is awesome, and just fishing in general. I've done deep sea fishing, fly fishing. Um, and I think there's nothing better than like standing on the river in Montana or Wyoming and, fishing that way. So, it's a skill for sure. We got to whip that back, the rod back in an accurate fashion. But yeah, it was great. I got some more experience and would love to do it again.
I told you before, you have an open invitation to fish with me. I'm crazy. And I like to go to all the urban spots and even some further out spots. So you have an open invitation, you, your husband, anyone who wants to come this fall.
Yes, I
So
got to take you up on that for sure.
absolutely. When you were speaking to these lodge owners, did they ever express any concerns about maybe their businesses being jeopardized, relating to politics, or maybe the attack on the hunting and fishing livelihoods? I don't know if you got to talk to them offline about that, but I've heard from a number of people who run these outfitting businesses that they're a little worried about where the country is going and where the industry may be in the future with different attacks on the lifestyle.
Yeah, totally. I didn't get into politics too much with the owners, but it just generally, if you own a big ranch, you're the issues that affect you are obviously conservation and legislation that comes out of Washington D.C., whether it's the EPA or the Interior Department. And yeah, they try to control a lot of what these ranches do. Some of them have more freedom than others, just depending on which state they're in. And actually, Three Forks was super interesting. In Oregon, I mean, all of them, but Three Forks in Oregon, in Highland Hills, Oregon, were specifically more interesting because they had these really interesting partnerships with the state in terms of the hunting. So in Wyoming, the owners have, this partnership where they allow hunting, and they work with the state in Colorado, actually, because it's on the border, to allow public hunting and in combination with private hunts on the ranch. But definitely they worry about government overreach, the EPA coming in and saying they can't use a certain, their property a certain way. And of course, we've seen these big Supreme Court battles play out this year, in addition to over the past, couple decades on that issue. They also worry about fires, right? Because of the way that the forests are not managed out west. So, forestry policy certainly, is something that they think about all the time in their livelihood. So yeah, it definitely affects them and something that they know more about than anybody. And yet there's all these bureaucrats in Washington who tend to think they know better.
And we'll cover that momentarily into current events because there's a lot happening, but I really want to gauge your thoughts on that. But let's do one more last quick thing about the show. Can you tell my listeners, is there going to perhaps be more outdoor programming from you in the future?
I
Can they
hope
expect that?
so. I hope so. There's no guarantee for a season 2, but if everybody watches it and sends nice notes about how they like it and want more, then the chances of a second season go up. So I think people have really enjoyed it so far. I certainly enjoyed it, doing it, and I would love to do it again.
All right, everyone, heed Katie's advice on that. Now we're going to move into public policy because this is your bread and butter. And you focus the gamut on so many different issues, but you also do pay attention to what happens in energy and conservation. Let's focus in more so on, I guess, what we can consider Manchin's betrayal. He's kind of been this stopgap for bad climate related policy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's going full-fledged into this so-called Inflation Reduction Act because he wants guarantees for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is actually a good project.
Right.
But in my estimation, that's not the way to achieve it, not to concede to the extremist demands to get a pipeline when there's no assurances. And I saw today in E&E News that there's going to be actually NEPA roadblocks, not surprisingly, to this. So what are your impressions of that in his position and kind of betrayal of his constituents?
Yeah, well, first I'll say on the pipeline, yeah, I'm not sure why Manchin is so confident that the pipeline will actually get built and move forward, just given all of the regulations and hoops that they're going to have to jump through. And I don't know why he trusts the Biden administration not to go back on their word when it comes to approving permits and not caving to the protesters who may show up and demand that the pipeline not be built. That's the first thing. It is a good project, but he shouldn't have to trade more inflation, higher taxes for that pipeline. The administration, especially given the way that gas prices have been through the roof and energy prices to heat people's homes ahead of the winter, the pipeline should be approved regardless of a trade or a vote on this bill. The name of it is absolutely ridiculous. It's just a lie, the Inflation Reduction Act. And then the Biden White House and the chief of staff continue to argue that it's not a bill that raises taxes. Well, it does raise taxes, but inflation is a tax. So we've seen a 9.1% increase in inflation over the past year and a half. We've only seen wage growth at 3%. So that's a real problem, especially when it comes to the war on energy that really underpins all of the problems we're having with the economy. I saw your tweet the other day about how people were upset about Chef Ramsay, like talking about a lamb being slaughtered for a meal, right? And how everyone was outraged. And you said something like, well, how do they think that stuff gets to their plate, right? It's the same thing with energy. It's like nobody really ever thinks about the fact that every single part of the economy is dependent on fuel. You need diesel fuel to get grain out of the ground, to get vegetables out of the ground. You need diesel fuel to get a truck across the country to a grocery store. I mean, every single thing, even to get stuff from overseas here requires that to put on ships. So the idea that, we're just going to transition quickly to inefficient, non-clean electric, solar panel, wind turbine energy is ridiculous. And I always, I never call it green energy. I never call it clean energy because it's not. It's a farce. Like solar panels are not clean or green forms of energy, and they're inefficient. Windmills, no one ever talks about, how do you dispose of the windmills when they go bad quickly? They're not these sustainable, it's not like an engine that you can use for 30, 40, 50 years if taken care of properly. These windmills have a very short lifespan, and there's no real environmentally friendly way to dispose of them. It's the same thing with electric batteries. So, they're so focused on this definition of emissions being the only thing that matters when it comes to cleaning up the environment. And it's just such a terrible standard in terms of determining how we move forward with keeping our air clean, our water clean, and with conservation, not environmentalism. But they're so focused on that CO2 number rather than thinking about like all the trash that will pile up as a result of these quote clean and green energy projects. It really just is quite remarkable to me how that part of it is just completely buried. But this bill, again, going back to the bill, it subsidizes China to send more cheap, inefficient environmentally not friendly solar panels into the country. And so I don't know why Joe Manchin would think that A, trust the Biden administration to follow through with this project, but B, that it would be good for people in West Virginia to have an increase in inflation when it's the fifth poorest state in the country. So I'm not, I don't know. I think he just had to prove that he was a Democrat again. Like he's been, holding up their agenda for so long that I think he finally had to just kind of go back to proving he's a Democrat. But we'll see. So
I think that's a good summary of it. And I haven't been able to go through I think it's 500 pages. It's some monstrosity of a bill, like all of the bills in Washington these days.
yeah,
And going back to kind of your descriptor of these clean energy proponents, I don't know if you see this too. There's a common thread among all of them, whether they're in elected office, they're so-called private stakeholders, activists, what have you. Most of them never spend time outdoors. I don't know if you see the
right.
same thing.
Yep.
So they're
It's true.
kind of lecturing from an ivy tower. They don't know how oil and gas development happens. I've seen some fracking operations. I've seen a little bit of energy development myself, and they tend to the land very carefully and they don't want to screw up because then they're going to have a lot of stuff to pay for and a lot of people will lose jobs. So I think it's a complete disconnect from where everything is sourced and this animus to clean, cheap fuel that has worked for us and that has provided obviously cheaper prices and that has made us prosperous compared to a lot of countries. And now we're seeing, I started to cover a lot, and I'll try to do this for town hall too. I think you'll appreciate this, but talk more about ESG because all these countries that have adopted these obviously net zero policies have essentially collapsed or are on the verge of collapse. And so there's that whole overlap with that issue too. And let's segue into kind of maybe wildlife conservation. Is there anything that has popped out to you from this administration and maybe even from our side of the aisle, legislation or actions that concern you? I know I've covered a lot of it for town hall about the attacks to hunting and fishing that kind of go under the radar, but is there anything that sticks out to you that you want my listeners to be aware of more so?
I just think that the general issues of just, not wanting hunters and conservationists to be using the land, having, taking away private public partnerships that we've seen that are efficient to forest management, you know, thinking that environmental groups are better advisors when it comes what to do out west than people who work the land, like ranchers and farmers, as you were saying. This idea that farmers are the enemy and therefore they have to be overregulated, and ranchers too. And then of course there's the issue that I saw during the show is with when there's an animal that's been federally protected, whether it's wolves or alligators, that tends to turn into a problem for ranchers and farmers and the environment because they're overpopulated and the rules have not been updated to um, properly reflect an evolution of that issue. So just generally the overbearing burden of the EPA thinking that they should have total control over people's private property. I know we saw that win at the Supreme Court with the West Virginia case, which is a good thing. But generally, they believe that the government should be in charge of the land and that private ownership is a problem rather than seen as a benefit to wildlife conservation and being efficient with project cleanup and that kind of thing. So I think just overall, generally, the issues are that they don't see private landowners or as a partner. And despite the U.S. Forest Service failing to manage the forest, they're still not willing to allow private industry to come help. And I'm not sure how that changes until there's a new administration, to be quite honest.
You're absolutely correct. It won't change until there's a conservationist Republican administration. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to just see radical preservation. Have you
Yep.
paid much attention to what the Biden administration is doing that actually leads to loss of access with these lead bans at all?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are your thoughts on those?
I mean, this is something they've tried to do in hunting for years and years. And they'll say it's about, lead poisoning for endangered condors. We saw this in California. Arizona's tried to do it. They also tried to expand it to forcing hunters to use, quote, lead-free ammunition in all hunting. It's really just a backdoor hunting ban based on unscientific studies that they claim prove that, birds are eating bullets all the time. That's just not true. It's not scientifically sound. And it's just a way for the radical left and environmentalists to, again, take hunters out of the system, which is so interesting and ironic because hunters are the ones who actually pay all of the money to, actually conserve the environment. Whereas, these environmentalists, preservationists, as you say, they don't contribute anything to the system. Like they just mooch off of what hunters have already been doing. One thing that we probably should talk about is the Republican bill that has been introduced to repeal the excise taxes that pay for all that conservation. That's just like a crazy, crazy bill. But yeah, so the lead thing is something they try a lot, and in the States, they've been successful in some ways in pushing back on some of that stuff, but they're trying to do it more federally now, which is a big problem.
Yeah, and it'll lead to loss of access. I think they're also trying to undo that big expansion in the Trump administration. It was like 2.2 million acres and attach it to lead bans. Now there are comment periods. I don't know if they were done or they're close to being finished to comment on banning lead in actually several wildlife management areas in Virginia and in the mid-Atlantic. So I need to put in some comments and say, no, this is a stupid idea myself.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, we all have to do that a little better. But yeah, it seems like they're doing these little things here and there. And then also the Interior Secretary, I think their department took off that they will not take away access to hunting and fishing under the banner of no net loss. So they're not adhering to that. It seems like that whole agency mission statement is definitely not being fulfilled under this administration. But yeah, if you want to touch upon the Return Act and your thoughts on that, I know I covered that for the website too. But do you think that hurts Republicans with sportsmen? Because Republicans have an opportunity to be for sportsmen and women. I always argue this all the time. And I think this bill has nothing to do with combating gun control, just really dividing people in the sportsman community who are for the Second Amendment too. Do you have similar thoughts or different thoughts?
Yeah. So I just, out of all the things to go after when it comes to protecting the Second Amendment, this is just a really bad idea. So what's the name of the congressman who first introduced
Andrew
it?
Clyde.
Okay, so I actually was at the congressional sportsman shoot with him, and he was on our team, and he started bringing this up. And I was with the former wildlife secretary under Trump, Ariel.
Aurelia Skipwith.
Yes, Skipwith, and he was telling us about this idea, and we just both were like dumbfounded about why you would ever introduce this. It just gives, it takes away the opportunity for hunters to be conservationists. It's something that hunters support. It's something that Second Amendment advocates support, and it brings up an issue that wasn't an issue. And then more concerning, a lot of Republicans just like jumped on it. Like I think Elise Stefanik jumped on it. Jim Banks endorsed it, and it was sold as the most pro Second Amendment bill ever introduced. And I think that's really why he did it, is he wanted to be able to say, that he introduced the bill. But in terms of the damage it would do, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And just given all of the issues that you could bring up about the Second Amendment and the way it's under attack, and it would completely change in a negative way how conservation is funded in this country voluntarily. I mean, people voluntarily buy fishing licenses and that kind of thing to fund conservation. So it just doesn't make any sense to me at all that they would bring this up.
And I bet you a lot of them are going to pose in blaze orange when it comes for re-election and pretend that they never supported this. But more positively, actually, I think 7 members have now rescinded co-sponsorship or support for the bill because of pressure from sportsmen and women. So I think many will start to peel back support. And I heard internally from some in Congress that said that if the Republicans take control, this will not be heard.
Well, when I was asking him, how are you going to make up for like the billions of dollars that are placed into the system through, these excise taxes? And he said he didn't really have an answer for that. So if you're going to, rip up something that's been the most successful conservation program in the history of the country, you better have a good replacement. And he really did not have a good answer for that.
There's actually a fund he's proposing under like a similar model, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And he's like, well, we can do it from offshore oil and gas royalties. And I wrote for us at Town Hall, I said, well, given that we have an administration that's waging a war on energy, how are you going to replenish those funds in this new substitute programmed. Like, you're not going to be able to under the next few years with this administration. So it doesn't make any sense to do that, because we're seeing a diminishment in that funding source. So it makes no sense. And one of my friends actually interviewed him, and he didn't get him to admit that he was wrong, but he questioned him and skewered him actually really well. One of my friends who's a waterfowler in Florida. And so he's so adamant about this. I think it's going to hurt him and other Republicans who don't reconsider. And I think, like I said, this will just peel back at the inroads that I think the party and the conservative movement has been trying to make, because these people are naturally conservative. They're independent. They're self-sufficient. They don't want government to interfere with their livelihoods. And this is such a huge step back. So I'm thankful that you share similar opinions. And I think most people do. I think most people on the right do agree. And this is just a distraction from gun control. And speaking of gun control, you probably have heard about some of the different bills that have passed and follow those closely. The so-called assault weapons ban, banning the AR-15, although AR-15s, modern sporting rifles, are now actually proliferating. Well, so what have been your impressions of those hearings and that bill? Do you think it's going to make headway in the Senate?
I don't think so. The thing that House Democrats don't understand is that gun owners are more diverse than they've ever been in the history of the country. There are millions more new gun owners who purchased AR-15s over the past 2 years than we've seen ever. When I go to the range in Virginia, I'm a minority. I'm a minority in terms of who is at the range. So they really do cut across lots of different demographics when it comes to who gun owners are. And at a time when crime is increasing, when more people are getting into the outdoor lifestyle, getting away from the cities, or people who are still in the cities who want to protect themselves from violent criminals, people don't really trust the government to take care of them on this issue. It's a very, as you said earlier, an ivory tower type look. It's all these people who have private security or are protected by police all day on Capitol Hill, telling regular everyday Americans that they want to choose what they can and cannot use to protect themselves. And an AR-15 is the most popular modern sporting rifle in the country. There's probably, NSSF just released a study about how many they think are in circulation. They put it at like 22 million. I think it's double that. So they're just trying to find any issue to rile up their base ahead of the midterms. But it's not something that would actually have an impact on crime, because the first ban didn't have an impact on crime or mass shootings. But again, goes back to their ideology about government control. If you're an unarmed population, it's a lot easier to force you to do things that you don't want to.
Yes, and having the Second Amendment separates us from the rest of the world, much like where my family came from, where violent crime was really high because there was an absence of the Second Amendment or a similar kind of component to it. I always heard about my grandfather and people of his era not having guns. It was the first thing they took away before they sent them to the gulags and other similar prison camps. So people don't know what they're working with when they're doing this. And I think the public is turning against gun control. Like, a lot of polling is showing that. Similarly with concealed carry, I think it's weird. People are opposed to AR-15s in some polling, but they support almost overwhelmingly concealed carry. So I don't know what the methodology is, like how they're phrasing the questions. It doesn't seem like they're consistent. So I think the public is starting to turn in our direction with respect to favorable opinions of the Second Amendment, but we still have to educate them on constitutional carry and a few other aspects. But I think people will come around.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, there's been this kind of push on the gun control issue to like blame gun owners for the bad behavior of criminals or of parents who weren't, involved in their children's lives, and then they went to commit a mass shooting. And I think that they're smart enough to understand that you can't blame an entire swath of people, millions of other people, for the actions of a few. And it's always a difficult argument to make because it's horrific when one of those situations occurs. But when you get down into the details, it's usually pretty preventable by the people who are involved. And in terms of really solving problems, you're not going to solve it with the federal government.
No, and not by going after the manufacturers. And actually, the so-called immunity protections that they enjoy are not foolproof. There are like 5 or 6 exceptions where they can actually be charged with complicity. But most of the time, manufacturers don't have any involvement in crimes. So it's funny that they're scapegoating them, these perfectly reasonable people. in the industry who don't want their products to be abused whatsoever. So they're like, we have to go after the manufacturers. They're the only ones who enjoy immunity, but that's not true.
But they're also legal products.
Yes.
The whole idea of them targeting these CEOs and dragging them in front of Congress to harass them for a product that is a legal, constitutionally protected product is absolutely asinine and an abuse of power. And they do it over and over and over again.
Is there any other thing you want to talk about? Do you want to point my listeners to where they can watch your new show on Fox Nation?
Yeah.
Anything else you're up to?
Just getting through the summer and, looking forward to the fall and getting outside and hopefully doing some more stuff with Fox Nation. But yeah, my new show, Luxury Haunting Lodges of America, is on Fox Nation right now. So go subscribe and enjoy. If you need something to binge, it's a great binger. So I appreciate you having me on the show to talk about it and current events, of course.
Absolutely. And where can people follow you in your amazing adventures, of course?
Well, you can find me everywhere at Town Hall, on Fox News, Fox Nation, and of course on social media, Instagram and Twitter. Instagram is much more fun than Twitter. So that's where the real fun stuff is.
Although I don't know if you've noticed, like everyone else, the engagement on Instagram has been so down. It's pathetic.
I know. It's true.
Make Instagram again.
I agree. We should start a campaign.
Thank you, Katie, so much. I really appreciate you spending time with me. And I know we'll hit the water together or do some activity this fall. So follow up with me and we'll do that.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't already, make sure you find us on your preferred podcast player. We largely circulate on Apple, Spotify, and countless others, but those are our two big podcast platforms we want to push. Make sure you're subscribed there, especially on Apple. If you like the podcast a lot, go leave us some reviews. We'd be more than grateful to get some 5-star reviews from you guys. Moreover, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and a little bit on YouTube. We don't populate there, but connect with us on social media. Find me personally on social media with blue check marks. Super easy to find, and I would love to hear your feedback and know who you'd like to see on the podcast. Thanks for listening to District of Conservation. Stay tuned for the next episode.